I worked as a night cook at a 24-hour diner off Interstate 80 in Nebraska. It was one of those classic roadside places, the kind you see in movies but never really believe exists until you're standing in one at 3 a.m, spatula in hand. Vinyl booths cracked from decades of truckers sliding in and out. Checkered floors that had seen better days, worn thin in paths from the door to the counter to the kitchen, and that neon sign outside, blazing, open in pink and blue letters that hummed and flickered whenever a big rig rumbled past. During the graveyard shift, we'd get all types, mostly truckers, their eyes red-rimmed and distant, needing coffee strong enough to keep them alert for another 200 miles. Insomniacs who'd rather sit in a bright diner than alone in the dark with their thoughts. The occasional drunk stumbling in after last call, looking for eggs and bacon to soak up whatever poison they'd chosen that night. The kitchen was small, cramped, really, just me, and a waitress named Carol working from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Carol had been doing this for years. She was in her 50s, tough as boot leather, with a smoker's rasp and a wit that could cut glass. We had our routine down pat. Prep work before the dinner crowd leftovers ran out, cleaning during the dead hours between 3 and 5, serving a handful of customers who wandered in looking for something we couldn't quite name, but always tried to provide anyway. Most nights were quiet, almost meditative. The rhythmic scrape of the grill, the gurgle of fresh coffee brewing, the occasional clink of silverware. It became a kind of music. But one night in August, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly. Tuesdays were always slow. We'd had maybe 5 customers all night, and by 2 a.m., the place was empty except for one trucker nursing his 4th cup of coffee at the counter. Carol was refilling the napkin dispensers, and I was breaking down the grill, ready to clean it, when she suddenly went still. She'd been facing the dining room, and something in her posture made my hand stop mid-scrub. Then she turned toward me, and I saw her face had gone chalk white. Carol didn't scare easy. I'd seen her handle belligerent drunks and creeps without batting an eye, but now her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. "There's someone in booth 7, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't see him come in. The trucker at the counter was reading a newspaper, oblivious. The door hadn't chimed. I would have heard it. That damn bell was loud enough to wake the dead. I leaned forward and looked through the order window. Booth 7 was in the far corner, tucked away where the lighting always seemed dimmer no matter how many bulbs we replaced. And sure enough, there was a man sitting there. He wore a flannel shirt, red and black checked, and dark jeans. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, but his face was obscured by shadow despite the bright fluorescent lights overhead. It was like darkness had pooled around his head, refusing to be scattered by the artificial brightness. Something about him felt fundamentally wrong. Not threatening exactly, but wrong in the way a photograph taken at the wrong angle looks wrong. Off. Unnatural. Carol grabbed her order pad, her hand shaking slightly. She was a professional, though, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her from doing her job. I watched through the window as she approached his table, her steps slower than usual. I could see her mouth moving, saw her pen poised of a pad, but I couldn't hear what was being said. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then came back to the kitchen. Her face had gone from white to an odd gray color. She handed me the ticket without a word. I looked down at it. The paper was slightly damp, which was odd. Carol's hands never sweated, even during the rush. It was blank except for 3 words scrawled across the top in handwriting that didn't look like Carol's. "I'm so cold. What does he want?" I asked, staring at those words. They seemed to pulse on the page, growing darker as I watched. Carol shook her head. Her hands were trembling now, really trembling. He just kept saying he was cold, over and over. I'm so cold. I'm so cold. I asked him what he wanted to order, and he just kept saying it. I don't know what to make of it. Tom, I don't. His voice didn't sound right. I looked back through the window. The man hadn't moved, still sitting there with his hands folded, head bowed, surrounded by that impossible shadow. I'll go talk to him, I said, stripping off my apron. Carol grabbed my arm. Don't, she whispered. Something's wrong with him. Something's really wrong. But I was already moving. I'm not sure what I was thinking. Maybe that he was sick, hypothermic somehow, that we needed to call an ambulance. Maybe I was just too stubborn to admit that what I was feeling was fear. As I crossed the dining room, the trucker looked up from his newspaper and watched me with mild curiosity. The temperature began to drop. At first, I thought maybe the AC had kicked on high, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, that makes your joints ache. By the time I reached booth 7, I could see my breath coming out in visible puffs. Even though it was August and the diner's AC was barely working on its best day, the man didn't look up as I approached. Sir, my voice came out shakier than I wanted. What can I get you? For a long moment, nothing, then slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, he raised his head. His skin was blue-gray, the color of a storm cloud or a frozen lake. His lips were almost black, cracked and peeling. Frost clung to his eyebrows and hair. Actual frost, tiny crystals that caught the light and glittered. His eyes, when they found mine, were clouded over. The whites turned the color of old ice. When he spoke, his voice crackled like ice breaking under weight. Each word seemed to cause him pain. I'm so cold. Can't get warm. Been walking so long. So long. Can't remember when I was warm. I backed away, my hands trembling worse than Carol's had. The cold was intensifying, spreading outward from him in waves. I could feel it in my chest now, making it hard to breathe. Carol was at the register, one hand on the phone, staring at us with wide eyes. The trucker had abandoned his newspaper and was watching openly now, his face confused. But the other couple had come in while I was cooking. They seemed oblivious, focused on their coffee and newspapers like nothing unusual was happening. The man stood up, and that's when I saw it. Water was pooling around his feet, melting ice dripping from his clothes onto the checker floor. His flannel shirt was soaked through, frozen stiff in places. As he moved, chunks of ice fell from him, clinking against the linoleum like broken glass. He walked toward the door. Each footstep left a wet print, a puddle of melted ice that seemed far too much for one man to carry. I stood frozen, no pun intended, watching him move with this terrible slowness, like walking with something he'd forgotten how to do properly and was relearning with each step. As he reached the entrance, he put one hand on the door. I saw his fingers leave frost patterns on glass and push through. The bell chimed, tinny and distant. And then, right there in the doorway, he simply vanished, dissolved into the night air like mist, like he'd never been there at all. The temperature returned to normal. So quickly it was almost painful, warm air rushing in to fill the void he'd left. Carol and I stood there, staring at the door, at the wet footprints leading to nowhere. The trucker broke the silence. What the hell was that? I don't know, I said, and my voice sounded hollow in my own ears. But I did know. Somewhere deep down I knew. The next day, after I'd gone home, failed to sleep, watched the sun come up to my apartment window. I did what I should have done immediately. I looked up recent accidents on Interstate 80. There were always accidents on 80. It was a dangerous road, especially in winter. Even in summer, you heard about jackknifed trucks, pileups, vehicles gone off the road in the middle of nowhere. It took me about 20 minutes to find it. 3 nights earlier, 3 nights, not the night we'd seen him, but 3 nights before, a trucker had gone off the road during a freak storm. It had been one of those weird weather events, a winter squall in the middle of summer. Temperature dropping 30 degrees in an hour, ice coating the highway without warning. His rig had gone into the median, rolled, ended up in a ditch about 15 miles west of our diner. They'd found his body 4 miles from the crash site, frozen solid in his cab. According to the report, he'd been trying to walk to the nearest town for help. His CB radio had been damaged in the crash. His cell phone dead. So he'd started walking. The diner was along that route. If you were walking from where he crashed, following the highway, looking for lights in the distance, you'd see our neon sign, pink and blue, spelling out hope in the darkness. Open. I quit 2 weeks later. Carol quit the same day. We never really talked about it, never sat down and discussed what we'd seen, what was there to say. But I knew she felt it too. Every time a customer walked in, we'd both tense up, watching to see if they cast the right shadow, if they radiated the right warmth. Neither of us could shake the image of that frozen man, endlessly searching for warmth he'd never find, walking the same route over and over, trapped in the last desperate moments of his life. Sometimes I drive past that diner. It's still there, still open 24 hours, still serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs. But I never stop. I can't, because every time I look at that building, I see him standing in the doorway, ice dripping from his clothes, his voice crackling like breaking ice. I'm so cold. Can't get warm. Been walking so long. I worked night security at a corporate office tower in downtown Chicago, a 40-story glass and steel monument to modern architecture and the casual brutality of corporate ambition. The building was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, the kind of place that looked impressive in daylight and vaguely threatening after dark. My shift was midnight to 8 in the morning, and most nights I was completely alone except for the occasional cleaning crew that would sweep through between 2 and 4 a.m., their equipment humming and clattering in the empty spaces. The building had a reputation. That should have been my first warning sign, really. Several security guards before me had quit without explanation, didn't even give 2 weeks' notice, just walked off the job in the middle of their shift and never came back. The turnover rate was unusually high, even for security work, but the pay was good, actually good, not just good by security standards, almost suspiciously good, and I needed the money. Student loans, credit card debt, the usual millennial financial nightmare. So I didn't ask too many questions during the interview, and they didn't volunteer any information beyond the basics. My duties were straightforward enough. Patrol each floor once per shift, check that all doors were locked, monitor the security cameras from the lobby desk, and respond to any alarms. The building was equipped with state-of-the-art motion sensors that would trigger if anyone was moving around after hours. They were sensitive too. I'd learned that in my first week when I set them off 3 times just by walking too close to certain zones. The job was mostly boring. Hour after hour of watching camera feeds, showing empty hallways and dark offices. The occasional email alert when a sensor glitched. The cleaning crew coming through like clockwork. I'd do my patrol around 4 a.m., usually taking stairs for the exercise, checking doors, clearing the occasional alarm caused by a plant swaying near a sensor or a poster that had come loose and fallen. Around 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, specifically my 5th week on the job, an alarm went off on the 31st floor. I checked the cameras first. Standard protocol. The monitors showed nothing unusual, just empty offices and dark hallways, exactly what they were supposed to show. The 31st floor was mostly executive offices and conference rooms, and at this hour, it should have been completely vacant. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy mag light that could double as a club if necessary, and took the elevator up. The building was silent, except for the hum of the elevator machinery. I watched the numbers climb. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 31. The doors opened with a cheerful ding that sounded obscene in the silence. The 31st floor was cold, not uncomfortably cold, not yet, but noticeably cooler than the lobby. I made a mental note to check the HVAC settings. The hallways stretched out in both directions, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in a sickly yellow-green glow. Shadows pooled in doorways and corners. I walked the hallways methodically, checking each door. Locked, 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 finding nothing out of place. The alarm had probably been triggered by the same glitch that caused half the false alerts in this building. Old wiring. The supervisor had told me they're planning to upgrade it next year. I was about to head back downstairs when I heard a phone ringing. The sound was muffled, coming from somewhere down the hall. I followed it to one of the corner offices, the ones with floor-to-ceiling windows and views of the city that probably cost as much as my annual salary. I tried the door. It was unlocked, which was wrong. All the executive offices were supposed to be locked after hours. Inside, a phone on the desk was ringing. Not a cell phone, an old-fashioned desk phone with a corded handset. The kind nobody really uses anymore. It sat there on an expensive-looking desk, ringing and ringing and ringing with that old-school mechanical bell sound that set my teeth on edge. I picked it up. Hello? Security. Static. The kind of static you used to get on landlines during storms. Crackling and popping. Then a voice, distant and distorted like it was coming from very far away or through water. Get out. Get out now. The line went dead. Just a silence and then the dial tone, flat and endless. I stood there, phone in hand, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands had gone clammy. The office was freezing now, my breath fogging in front of my face. That's when I noticed a window. Something was written on the glass in condensation, as if someone had breathed on it and traced letters with their finger. The letters were crude, uneven, written by someone in a hurry or someone whose hand was shaking. The message read, "They're watching." I backed out of the office, my hand fumbling for my radio. This was beyond my pay grade, way beyond. I needed to call the police, call my supervisor, call someone. I turned toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing too loud in the silence. That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched, that primal awareness that comes from millions of years of evolution, the knowledge that something predatory has noticed you. I spun around and saw them. Shadows, moving along the walls, taking human shapes but not quite right. Too tall, impossibly tall, their heads brushing the ceiling tiles. Too thin, their limbs like spider legs. Moving in ways that defied physics. Sliding along walls that should have been perpendicular to them. Turning corners at angles that hurt to look at. They were everywhere now. Emerging from offices with their doors still closed, seeping out of storage rooms, flowing from the break room like black water. Silent figures that seemed to absorb light. leaving trails of absolute darkness behind them. Where they touched the walls, the paint looked darker, older, decayed. They moved toward me slowly, deliberately. There was intelligence in their movement, purpose. They weren't randomly wandering. They were converging on me, cutting off escape routes, hurting me. I ran. My feet pounded against the carpet as I sprinted for the elevator, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear them, not footsteps exactly, but a sound like cloth dragging across rough surfaces, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The elevator doors were closing. I dove forward, hitting the button frantically, watching the gap narrow. The doors began to open again slowly, too slowly. I hammered the lobby button over and over, knowing it wouldn't make the elevator move faster, but unable to stop myself. They were closer now. I could see them reflected in the elevator's polished walls. Dark shapes that moved wrong, that looked like humans the way a scarecrow looks like a human. Roughly the right shape, but fundamentally wrong in every detail. The doors finally closed. Just before they shut completely, I saw one of the shadows reach out, its arms stretched, elongating impossibly, fingers like black knives extending toward me. It touched the elevator doors just as they sealed shut. Where it made contact, the metal turned dark, tarnished, spreading outward from the point of impact like corruption. I rode the elevator down, my back pressed against the far wall, watching those dark fingerprints spread across the doors. My legs were shaking so badly, I thought I might collapse. When the doors opened in the lobby, I stumbled out and went straight to my supervisor's contact. Called him at 2:30 in the morning. He answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed but not surprised. "Let me guess," he said before I could speak. "The 31st floor." I told him everything. The phone call, the message on the window, the shadows. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. "Yeah," he said finally, "that floor has issues. Just avoid it from now on. Do your patrol up to 30, then start again at 32. Don't go to 31 unless there's a fire." "What are they?" I asked. "Don't know. Don't want to know. The company's tried everything. Priests, mediums, those paranormal investigation teams. Nothing works. They just are. Company policy is to leave that floor alone after hours. You could have mentioned this in my training," I said. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We did mention it. In the paperwork you signed. Section 7, subsection C. Employee acknowledges unusual environmental conditions may exist on certain floors. You signed it." I had signed it. I'd signed a lot of paperwork without reading it carefully, too eager for the job to pay attention to the fine print. I worked there for 3 more months before finding another job. Every night, I'd watch the camera feed from the 31st floor, and every night, I'd see those shadows moving through the empty offices. They were always there, waiting. Sometimes they'd gather around the elevators, like they knew where I'd been. Sometimes they'd stand at the windows, their shapes silhouetted against the city lights, looking down at the street below, or looking at me. The building's still there, of course, still operating. I looked up the company that owns it. They've owned it since the 70s when it was first built. There are no reports of unusual deaths or tragedies associated with the building. No massacres or suicides that might explain it. It's just a normal corporate office tower with one floor that belongs to something else. I sometimes wonder about the people who work on the 30th and 32nd floors. Do they hear things? Do they feel watched? Or do the shadows only come out at night, when the building empties and darkness reclaims its territory? I don't know. I don't want to know. I just know I'll never work night security again. I worked as a maintenance technician for the New York City subway system for 6 years. It was good, honest work. Hard on the body but straightforward, with a union and decent benefits. My shift was 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. after the evening rush, but when trains still ran just frequently enough that we had to be careful, had to stay alert. That's when we could safely work on the tracks without shutting down lines and pissing off hundreds of thousands of commuters. The subway system is massive, sprawling, ancient. People think they know it from riding trains, but they only see the active stations, the cleaned up parts that tourists and office workers pass through. Below that is another city entirely. Abandoned stations, sealed tunnels, storage areas that haven't been properly inventoried since the 50s. The city's literal underbelly, dark and vast and mostly forgotten. One of my regular assignments was an abandoned station on the Lower East Side. It had been closed since the 70s, back when the city was broke and crime was out of control, and they'd shut down anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Station 17, we called it. Though that wasn't its real name. Its real name had been scraped off the walls decades ago, and nobody remembered what it had been. We still had to inspect it monthly, though. Structural issues, water damage, rat infestations, all the wonderful things that accumulate in forgotten spaces underground. The city was paranoid about cave-ins, about an abandoned station collapsing and taking an active tunnel with it. So once a month, some unlucky technician got assigned to go down there with a clipboard and a flashlight and make sure everything was still standing. The station was frozen in time. Old tile work, the kind they don't make anymore, in patterns of blue and white that had once been beautiful. Vintage advertisements on the walls, faded and peeling, selling products that hadn't existed in 40 years. Wooden benches rotting away, their slats curved and warped from moisture. Everything covered in a thick layer of grime and graffiti. It was connected to the active tunnels, so trains would occasionally pass through, their lights briefly illuminating the platform before plunging it back into darkness. Those moments were almost worse than the steady darkness, the sudden light revealing shapes and shadows that the mind tried to interpret, tried to make sense of, before darkness fell again and left you wondering if you'd really seen what you thought you'd seen. In October 15th, I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday and I'd been annoyed about having to work. I was down there doing my monthly inspection. I had my heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that could light up a space the size of a basketball court, and a radio to stay in contact with my supervisor up at the nearest active station. The air was damp and cold, probably 50 degrees, with that particular smell underground spaces get, a mix of standing water, mold, old concrete, and the metallic scent of the tracks. The only sounds were the drip of water from somewhere above, the skitter of rats in the darkness, and the distant rumble of trains passing through other tunnels. I was checking support beams, making notes about some cracks that would need monitoring when I heard singing. A woman's voice, clear and beautiful, echoing through the tunnels. She was singing an old jazz song, something from the 40s. I recognized the style even if I didn't know the specific song. The melody wound through the darkness, pure and strong, with that particular vibrato singers used back then. I stopped, my pen hovering over my clipboard. My first thought was that someone had gotten down here, some urban explorer or homeless person. It happens sometimes, despite the lock gates and security measures. People found ways into forgotten spaces. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing. This is a restricted area. You need to leave. The singing continued, didn't even pause. I followed the sound, moving carefully along the platform. My flashlight beam swept across old tiles and graffiti, across the empty tracks. She was at the far end of the platform, standing in the shadows where my light hadn't yet reached. I could see her silhouette, a woman in a dress, her posture straight and formal, in that way people used to stand in old photographs. I walked closer, my light finally falling on her. She wore a red dress, the kind with a full skirt and fitted bodice that women wore during World War II. Her hair was styled in victory rolls, perfectly arranged, not a strand out of place despite being in a subway tunnel. She stood at the very edge of the platform, her toes touching the yellow safety line that hadn't been yellow in decades, staring down at the tracks below, still singing that same jazz melody. "Ma'am," I said, try and keep my voice calm, professional. "You can't be here. This station is closed. It's not safe." She turned to face me. My blood went ice cold. The flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam shaking across her face. Half of her face was gone. The left side was crushed, torn, as if she'd been struck by something massive and moving at tremendous speed. Her skull was caved in, her jaw hanging at an impossible angle. I could see bone and dark cavities where features should have been, but the right side was intact, beautiful even, with carefully applied makeup and a serene expression. And she kept singing. Her voice never wavered, never showed strain. Despite her ruined jaw, despite the physical impossibility of producing sound through that destroyed throat, the melody continued, pure and haunting. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. My radio fell from my belt and clattered on the platform, the sound obscenely loud in the enclosed space. She stepped off the platform, just stepped off, as casually as someone stepping off a curb, and landed on the tracks below. She stood there in the well between the rails, still singing, and began walking into the tunnel. I shouted at her to stop, some instinct overriding my terror. I heard a train approaching. You can always tell, can feel in the rails before you hear it, a vibration that travels through the ground and into your bones. The headlight appeared in the distance, growing brighter. The woman stood directly in its path, still singing. She didn't move, didn't even turn to look at the approaching train, just stood there in her red dress with her victory roll hair and her destroyed face, singing that jazz song. The train roared past. I turned away, couldn't watch, certain I was about to witness a death, even though some part of my brain was screaming that she was already dead, that none of this made sense. When I looked back, the train was disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. She was gone. No impact, no scream, no sound at all except the fading rumble of the train and the echo of that jazz melody, which seemed to linger in the air long after it should have faded. I stood there, shaking, as the vibrations died away and silence returned. My radio was still on the ground where I dropped it. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Base, this is text 7. I'm coming up. Now. Copy that. Everything okay?" "No," I said. "Everything is not okay." Later, after I filed a report that my supervisor clearly didn't believe, after I'd gone home and tried to sleep and failed, I researched the station's history. The public library has archives, old newspapers on microfiche. It took me 3 days of searching to find it. In 1947, a woman was pushed onto the tracks during an argument with her husband. They'd been fighting on the platform. Witnesses said it had gotten physical, that he'd been drunk and violent. She'd tried to leave, to get on the next train, and he'd followed her to the edge of the platform. She was struck by an oncoming train and killed instantly. Multiple witnesses reported the same detail. She'd been singing when it happened, some popular song from that year, something about love or loss or both. She'd been singing and then she was gone. The husband was arrested, tried, convicted. He hanged himself in his cell before sentencing. I still work for the subway system. The pay is still good, the benefits still decent, and I've got too many years in to start over somewhere else. But I refuse assignments to that station now. Let someone else check the structural integrity, document the water damage, count the rats. I've seen enough. Sometimes late in my shift, when I'm working in the active tunnels and a train passes, I think I hear singing. Just for a moment, just at the edge of hearing, a woman's voice, clear and beautiful, singing a song from 70 years ago. And I wonder how many others like her there are, trapped in forgotten spaces below the city, replaying their final moments forever in the darkness. I worked night shift at a distribution warehouse in Oklahoma, one of those massive facilities that process thousands of packages every night for one of the big online retailers. The building was enormous, the size of several football fields. They told us during orientation, though I never bothered to verify. It certainly felt that big when you were walking through it at 3 a.m, row after row of towering shelves stocked with inventory stretching away in every direction. Most of the work was automated, conveyor belts that moved packages along at a pace that seemed just barely manageable if you never stopped moving. Robotic arms that could lift and sort with inhuman precision. Sorting machines that read barcodes and made decisions in microseconds. It was efficient, soulless, and vaguely dystopian. The future of commerce, they called it, but we still needed humans. Someone had to troubleshoot when the machines jammed or miscalculated. Someone had to handle special orders, the packages that were too irregular for the automated systems. Someone had to be there when things went wrong, which they did regularly. On the night shift, there were maybe 20 of us spread throughout the facility. We'd go hours without seeing another person, just walking through the mechanical landscape of conveyor belts and sorting machines, our footsteps echoing off the high ceiling, the constant white noise of motors and movement drowning out everything else. The oldest section of the warehouse, known as Zone F, was scheduled for demolition. It was a remnant from when the facility was smaller, before the massive expansion that had turned it into the behemoth it was now. The zone was structurally unsound. Cracked floors, rusted support beams, outdated wiring that was a fire hazard. The company had sealed it off, chained the entrances, put up signs warning that entry was forbidden and that violators would be terminated immediately. We were supposed to patrol past the entrance to Zone F several times per shift, just to make sure the seals were intact and nobody had tried to break in. It was a formality, really. Who would want to go into a crumbling section of warehouse in the middle of the night? One night in March 8th, a Friday. I remember because I was annoyed about working through the weekend. I was walking past Zone F when I heard voices. I stopped, my hand on my radio. The sound was unmistakable. Multiple people talking, shouting, the sound of activity. Footsteps, equipment moving, someone laughing. It sounded like a full crew working in there, dozens of people engaged in the usual warehouse tasks. But that was impossible. The zone was sealed off, the entrances chained and padlocked. Nobody was supposed to be in there. Nobody had been in there for months. I called my supervisor on the radio. His name was Marcus, a former military guy who took procedures seriously. Marcus, this is Jake. I'm at Zone F. I'm hearing voices inside. Multiple people. Sounds like a full crew working. There was a pause. Say again? I'm hearing people in Zone F. A lot of people. Another pause, longer this time. Stay put. I'll be there in 10. I waited, listening. The sounds continued. Voices, movement, the clatter of equipment. At one point I heard someone shout, "Watch your back," followed by laughter. Normal warehouse sounds, the kind I heard every shift, but coming from a place that should have been completely empty. 20 minutes later, Marcus always took longer than he said. He arrived, his flashlight swinging as he approached. He was a big guy, 6'4", and built like he still did military PT every morning. If there were intruders in there, I was glad he was with me. We approached the entrance together. The sounds had stopped. Everything was quiet, just the distant hum of the active warehouse sections. The chains were still in place, the padlock undisturbed. Marcus checked it carefully, tugging on it, examining the links for signs of tampering. Nothing. "You sure you heard something?" he asked. Positive. Multiple people, working, talking. It was clear as day. He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled out his keys. "Let's check it out." We unlocked the chain and pulled open the heavy metal door. It scraped against the concrete floor, the sound echoing. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside. Zone F was exactly as it had been in every report and description I'd heard. Empty shelves, dust-covered floors, no signs of recent activity. The air was stale and cold, smelling of rust and decay. Our footsteps raised small clouds of dust that swirled in our flashlight beams. But as we walked deeper, we found them. Fresh footprints in the dust. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, leading in all directions, overlapping, crisscrossing the floor in patterns that suggested organized activity. Work patterns. People moving with purpose, back and forth, like they were loading and unloading pallets, moving inventory, doing the same tasks we did in the active sections. Marcus and I looked at each other. His face, usually stoic and controlled, showed confusion, maybe fear. Then we heard it, a voice over the warehouse PA system, but wrong, distorted, the words reversed or played backwards, the sound painful to hear. It was counting down from 10. 10, 9, 8. We looked around. The PA system didn't work in Zone F. It had been disconnected months ago. The speakers removed. 7, 6, 5. "We should go," I said. 4, 3. Marcus nodded. We turned back toward the entrance. 2, 1. The countdown reached 0, and the lights went out. Complete darkness, absolute black. Our flashlights flickered and died, the batteries draining in seconds despite being fresh at the start of our shift. We heard footsteps, running, dozens of people moving in the dark all around us. The sound was overwhelming. Boots on concrete, the scrape of pallets being moved, the mechanical whir of equipment that shouldn't exist, and voices, so many voices, shouting instructions, calling out warnings, laughing, all of it layered on top of each other until it became a wall of sound that pressed in from every direction. Then came the screaming. Not screams of surprise or fear, these were screams of pain. Raw, agonized shrieks that made my blood run cold. Multiple voices, overlapping, some cutting off abruptly, others rising in pitch until they became inhuman. And underneath it all, a sound I couldn't identify at first, a grinding, crunching noise, like metal tearing through something it shouldn't. Marcus grabbed my arm and we ran. We crashed through the darkness, hands outstretched, bouncing off walls and shelves we couldn't see. The footsteps followed us, keeping pace. I could feel movement in the air around me, bodies passing close enough to touch but never quite making contact. Something brushed against my shoulder, fabric cold and damp. I jerked away and kept running. My shin hit something hard, and I went down, my hands breaking the fall. The floor was wet. I didn't want to think about why. Marcus was shouting my name. I followed his voice, crawling at first, then scrambling to my feet. My hands found a wall, then a door frame. The exit. We crashed through it and didn't stop until we reached the main warehouse, where the lights were bright and the machines hummed their normal mechanical song. We stood there, both of us bent over, gasping for breath. When I looked back, Zone F was silent again. Empty. The darkness inside seemed deeper than it should be, like it was absorbing light rather than just reflecting its absence. What the hell was that? I managed to say between breaths. Marcus didn't answer. His face was gray, his hand shaking as he pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Marcus. We need to seal Zone F immediately. Weld the doors shut if you have to. Nobody goes in there again." When we looked at the security footage later, and we did look, spent hours reviewing it, the cameras showed us entering Zone F, standing there for maybe 30 seconds in the darkness, then running out. That was it. No footsteps in the dust except our own. No sounds on the audio. Nothing. But I knew what I'd experienced. Marcus knew too. We didn't talk about it much, but I could see it in his eyes every time we passed those sealed doors. We both knew. The company demolished Zone F 2 weeks later. They moved up the timeline, citing structural concerns that had suddenly become critical. A crew came in during the day shift. They insisted on daylight, which the project manager thought was odd but didn't question, and brought the whole section down. Controlled demolition, they called it. They hauled away the rubble, poured new concrete, and within a month you couldn't tell Zone F had ever existed. But I could still feel it. On certain nights, when the warehouse was particularly quiet and I was alone in some distant section, I'd hear them. Faint voices, the echo of footsteps, someone laughing at a joke I'd never hear. The sounds of people who were still working, still going through their routines, forever trapped in the tasks they've been performing when they died, when they got stuck somehow between one moment and the next. I did some digging, went through old records at the county clerk's office on my day off. The warehouse had been built in 1987, but before that, the land had been industrial, a manufacturing plant. I found a newspaper article from 1983, small and buried on page 7. Factory fire claims 31 lives. A welding accident had sparked a blaze that trapped workers in the storage section. The fire doors had malfunctioned, sealing them in. By the time firefighters broke through, everyone inside was dead. The manufacturing plant had been demolished. The land sat vacant for 4 years before the warehouse was built, and Zone F, the oldest section of the warehouse, was constructed right on top of where that storage section had been. Some buildings hold memories, they say, but I think it's more than that. I think some tragedies are so terrible, so concentrated, that they burn themselves into a place. They create echoes that keep playing long after everyone involved is gone. And sometimes those echoes are strong enough to break through, to remind us that the past isn't really past at all. It's just waiting in the darkness, repeating itself forever. I still work at that warehouse. The pay is good, and in this economy, you don't walk away from a steady job with benefits. But I avoid the section where Zone F used to be. There's new concrete there now, new equipment, new inventory. During the day's shift, it's fine, just another part of the facility. But at night, when the building is mostly empty and the machines create shadows that move in ways machines shouldn't, I take the long route. I walk the extra distance, add 20 minutes to my patrol, just to avoid that section. Because sometimes when I'm nearby, I can still hear them. Still working. Still trapped. And I wonder if anyone can hear us from the other side. If we're the ghosts in their world, moving through spaces they once knew, doing tasks they once performed, blind to the fact that they're still there, right beside us, trying desperately to finish a shift that will never end. The last thing Marcus said to me before he quit, he lasted 3 weeks after the Zone F incident, was this: "You know what bothers me most? The screaming." It wasn't surprise. They knew what was happening. They'd known for a long time. They've been dying over and over in there for 40 years, and every time it's just as terrible as the first. He was right. That's what haunts me. Not that they're trapped, but that they know they're trapped. That they experience it fully every time. The horror never dulling, never fading. Just an eternal moment of pain and fear, playing on loop in a sealed-off section of a warehouse in Oklahoma. Sometimes I think about quitting too. Finding another job. Something during the day. Somewhere without history buried beneath the concrete. But where would I go? Every place has its ghosts. Every building has its shadows. At least here, I know where they are. At least here, I know which doors to avoid. The warehouse runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Packages move through like blood through veins. The building's purpose fulfilled with mechanical efficiency. And underneath it all, in the places we don't go, in the moments between shifts when everything goes quiet, the echoes remain. Still working. Still screaming. Still trapped in a moment that won't end. Zone F is gone, but what it contained isn't. Buildings can be demolished. Concrete can be poured. New structures can be raised. But some things don't need physical space to exist. Some things survive in the gaps between then and now, in the thin places where past and present overlap. And on certain nights, when the warehouse is at its quietest, when I'm alone with the machines and the shadows they cast, I can still hear the countdown. 10, 9, 8. And I know that somewhere in a version of this building that exists alongside ours, but just out of phase, they're still running through the darkness, still trying to escape what's already happened, still hoping that this time, maybe this time, they'll make it to the door before the screaming starts. But they won't. They never do.